My name is Sarah, and I'm about to tell you the most painful yet liberating story of my life. It happened 3 months ago, on a cold Tuesday morning in March, in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. The kind of morning where the sky hangs gray and heavy, matching the weight that had settled in my chest since Dad's heart attack 5 days earlier. I stood in the back of Riverside Funeral Home, watching people I hadn't seen in years file past Dad's casket. The scent of lilies mixed with that particular funeral home smell. A combination of old carpet, air freshener, and something I could never quite identify but always associated with goodbye. My sister Jessica stood near the front, surrounded by relatives and family friends. At 32, she was 2 years older than me, with perfectly styled blonde hair that somehow looked flawless even in grief. She wore a black designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her makeup applied just right. Even her tears seemed photogenic. Such a devoted daughter, I heard Aunt Martha whisper to someone behind me. Jessica was always Richard's favorite. She never missed a Sunday dinner, never moved away like some people. The "some people" comment was clearly directed at me. I had moved to Chicago for college 8 years ago and stayed there for work. In their eyes, this made me the ungrateful daughter who abandoned the family. "She's going to take this so hard," another voice murmured, "being the favorite child and all." I felt my jaw clench. The favorite. Everyone always said Jessica was Dad's favorite, and honestly, I believed it too. She was the one who got the bigger Christmas presents, the one whose achievements were hung on the refrigerator, the one Dad bragged about to his co-workers. She became a nurse, just like Mom had been before she passed away when I was 16. Jessica stayed close to home, got married young to her high school sweetheart, and gave Dad his only grandchildren. Meanwhile, I became a social worker in Chicago, a career choice that earned me lectures about wasting my potential and not thinking practically about my future. I remained single, focused on my career, helping troubled teenagers in the inner city. In Dad's eyes, and apparently everyone else's, I was the disappointment. As I stood there, listening to whispered conversations about Jessica being the golden child and the apple of Richard's eye, something twisted painfully in my stomach. It wasn't just grief. It was 29 years of feeling second best, of never being good enough, of watching my sister effortlessly earn the love and approval that I desperately craved. The viewing hours dragged on. Person after person approached Jessica with condolences, telling her how sorry they were for her loss, how much Dad loved her, how proud he was of her. I received polite nods and brief, "sorry for your loss" comments, but nothing more. It was as if I was a side character in my own father's funeral. By evening, when the funeral home finally closed, I was emotionally drained. Jessica and I hadn't spoken much. She was constantly surrounded by people, and I found myself gravitating toward the back of the room, feeling like an outsider in my own family's grief. As we prepared to leave, Jessica approached me for the first time all day. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her perfect composure finally cracking. "Sarah, we need to go through Dad's things tomorrow," she said, her voice hoarse from crying and greeting people all day. "The lawyer wants to meet with us about the will on Thursday." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Part of me wondered if Dad had left everything to Jessica. It would certainly fit the pattern of our relationship. "I know this is hard for you too," Jessica continued, and for a moment, I thought she might acknowledge the elephant in the room, the fact that everyone treated her like she was the only daughter who mattered. Instead, she said, "I know you two had your differences, but he loved you in his own way." In his own way. Even in her attempt at comfort, she confirmed what everyone else seemed to think, that Dad's love for me was conditional, different, lesser than what he felt for her. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom. The same room I'd painted purple in high school, with the same desk where I'd struggled through calculus homework while Jessica breezed through her classes. I stared at the ceiling and replayed every interaction I'd ever had with my father, looking for signs of the love Jessica insisted was there, in his own way. I remembered high school graduation, when I was valedictorian, but Dad spent the entire ceremony talking about Jessica's acceptance into the nursing program. I thought about the time I won a state award for my volunteer work with homeless youth, and Dad's response was to ask why I couldn't focus that energy on something more practical. I recalled every phone call home from college and later from Chicago, where he'd spend 5 minutes asking about my life before launching into updates about Jessica's job, Jessica's husband, Jessica's kids. The evidence seemed overwhelming. Jessica was the favorite, and tomorrow I'd have to face going through Dad's belongings, probably discovering even more proof of how much more he valued her than me. But as I finally drifted off to sleep around 3 a.m., something nagged at the back of my mind. Something about the way Dad had looked at me during our last conversation, 2 weeks before his heart attack. Something about his expression when I'd told him I was thinking about moving back to Ohio to be closer to family. I pushed the thought away. Tomorrow would be painful enough without building up false hope about deathbed revelations or hidden feelings. Tomorrow, I'd help Jessica sort through Dad's life, probably find a will that left everything to the favorite daughter, and then return to Chicago with whatever scraps of inheritance and dignity I had left. What I didn't know was that tomorrow would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my father, and myself. The next morning, I arrived at Dad's house, a modest 2-story colonial in Lakewood that he'd bought when Jessica and I were kids. The March wind cut through my jacket as I walked up the familiar driveway, past the basketball hoop where I'd spent countless hours shooting alone while Jessica was inside helping Mom with dinner. Jessica's SUV was already there, along with her husband Mike's truck. I could see moving boxes stacked on the front porch. Apparently, they'd gotten an early start. I found them in Dad's study, a small room off the living room, that had always been his sanctuary. Jessica was carefully wrapping Dad's golf trophies while Mike loaded books into boxes. The room looked smaller than I remembered, overwhelmed by the systematic dismantling of a life. "There you are," Jessica said without looking up. "We've been here since 7. I want to get through as much as possible before the kids get out of school." I noticed she'd already claimed Dad's watch, which sat on her wrist like a statement. "Where should I start?" I asked. "Maybe the closet," she suggested. "I can't bring myself to go through his clothes yet." Dad's closet was a study in practicality: work shirts, a few good suits, casual weekend clothes, all organized with military precision. As I folded each item and placed them in donation bags, I found myself remembering him wearing them, the blue flannel shirt he wore every Saturday morning while reading the paper, the gray suit he'd worn to my college graduation, looking uncomfortable and eager to leave. It was in the pocket of that gray suit that I found the first surprise: a small piece of paper with my Chicago address, written in Dad's careful handwriting. Not Jessica's address, which he certainly knew by heart since she lived 10 minutes away. My address, which he would have had to look up since I'd moved apartments twice in the past 3 years. I stared at the paper, confused. Why would Dad have my address written down? He'd never visited me in Chicago, never even expressed interest in seeing where I lived. I slipped the paper into my pocket and continued sorting through clothes. In another jacket, I found a business card for a travel agent, with a handwritten note on the back. "Chicago packages. Call about spring rates." My hands were shaking now. I sat down on Dad's bed, trying to process what I was finding. Why would Dad be looking into travel to Chicago? Why would he have my address written down? "Sarah? You okay in there?" Jessica called from the study. "Fine," I managed to call back, though I was anything but fine. I finished with the clothes quickly and moved to Dad's dresser. In the top drawer, underneath carefully folded underwear and socks, I found something that made my heart stop. A manila folder labeled Sarah in Dad's handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, dozens of them. Articles about the community center where I worked, including one where I was quoted about our youth mentorship program. A piece from the Chicago Tribune about a scholarship fund I'd helped establish for underprivileged kids. Even a small mention in a local paper about a charity 5K I'd organized. But it wasn't just newspaper clippings. There were printouts of emails. Emails I'd sent to Dad over the years, casual updates about my life that I thought he barely read. In the margins, he'd written notes, next to a mention of a difficult case I was working on. Proud of her dedication. Next to a story about helping a teenage girl get into college. Just like her mother, always helping others. At the bottom of the folder was a letter written in Dad's handwriting, but never sent. It was dated just 2 months ago. "My dear Sarah," it began, "I know I haven't been good at telling you how proud I am of you. Your mother always said I showed love through worry, and I guess she was right. I worried about you in Chicago, so far from family, working with troubled kids in dangerous neighborhoods. I worried that you were sacrificing your own happiness to help others. I worried that my worry came across as disappointment, when the truth is exactly the opposite. You are so much like your mother, it takes my breath away sometimes. She had the same fierce heart, the same need to help others, the same stubborn independence that both frustrated and amazed me. When she got sick, she made me promise to let you kids find your own paths, even if those paths scared me. I kept that promise with you maybe too well. I never told you that I drive past the community center when I'm in Chicago for doctor's appointments. I never told you that I keep every article about your work in a special folder. I never told you that. When people ask me about my daughters, I tell them about Jessica's steady, dependable success, but I brag about your courage. Jessica chose the safe path, and I'm proud of her for building a good life. But you chose the hard path, the path that helps others, and I'm in awe of you for that. You're making a difference in ways that matter, just like your mother did. I'm going to mail this letter tomorrow. I'm tired of being the kind of father who shows love through worry instead of words. I hope it's not too late to start telling you how proud I am to be your dad." The letter was dated February 15th. Dad had his heart attack on February 16th. I sat on his bed, crying and reading the letter over and over again. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship was crumbling around me. He hadn't been disappointed in me. He'd been proud. He hadn't forgotten about me in Chicago. He'd been following my life closely enough to collect newspaper clippings. He hadn't favored Jessica because she was better. He'd worried about me because I reminded him of Mom. "Sarah?" Jessica's voice was closer now. "Mike's going to run these boxes to Goodwill, and then we need to go through Dad's important papers." I quickly wiped my eyes and closed the folder, but not before slipping the letter into my purse. I needed time to process this before I could face Jessica and the rest of the family. But as I rejoined them in the study, I couldn't stop thinking about the implications of what I'd found. If Dad felt this way about me, why had he never shown it? Why had everyone in the family, including Jessica, believed he favored her? As if summoned by my thoughts, Jessica looked up from a box of Dad's financial documents. "Find anything interesting in the bedroom?" I almost told her about the folder, about the letter, about the complete reversal of everything I'd believed about my relationship with Dad. But something held me back. Maybe it was years of feeling like the outsider, or maybe it was the need to understand more before I shared this revelation. "Just clothes," I said instead. "Nothing important," but it was important. It was the most important thing I'd ever found. And tomorrow, at the reading of Dad's will, I had a feeling there would be more surprises waiting. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Cleveland weather that matched my emotional state. I'd barely slept since finding Dad's letter, reading it dozens of times, and trying to reconcile this loving, proud father with the distant, critical man I thought I knew. The law office of Patterson and Associates sat in downtown Cleveland, in one of those old buildings with marble floors and dark wood paneling that was supposed to inspire confidence, but mostly just felt intimidating. Jessica and I rode the elevator to the 7th floor in silence, both lost in our own thoughts about what we were about to learn. Mr. Patterson was exactly what you'd expect from a family lawyer who'd been practicing for 40 years. Gray hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the patient demeanor of someone who delivered both good and bad news to countless families. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to 2 leather chairs across from his desk. "I know this is difficult, but your father was very specific about his wishes." Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand, a gesture that would have comforted me a week ago, but now felt complicated given what I'd discovered about Dad's true feelings. "Before we begin with the will," Mr. Patterson continued, "your father left specific instructions for me to give you this." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's familiar handwriting. My heart raced. Another letter? Jessica looked surprised but not concerned, probably assuming it was just Dad's way of softening whatever unequal distribution was coming in the will. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small key. "Sarah," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I've passed away before I could find the courage to tell you everything in person. The key is to a safety deposit box at First National Bank, Box 247. Inside, you'll understand why I made the choices I did, and why some truths had to wait until now." I looked up at Mr. Patterson, confused. "I don't understand. What's in the safety deposit box?" "I'm afraid I don't know the contents," he replied. "Your father was very private about that matter. Shall we proceed with the will?" I nodded, clutching the key in my palm like a talisman. Mr. Patterson put on his reading glasses and opened a thick folder. "The last will and testament of Richard James Morrison," he began formally. "To my daughters, Jessica Lynn Morrison Chen and Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, I leave my love and my hopes that you will understand the choices I made as your father." He paused and looked at both of us. "Your father was very specific about wanting me to explain his reasoning for certain decisions, not just read the legal language." Jessica and I exchanged glances. This wasn't starting the way either of us expected. "To my daughter Jessica," Mr. Patterson continued, "I leave the family home and its contents, with the exception of items specifically designated for Sarah. Jessica, you have built a beautiful, stable life, and you've always been the steady, dependable daughter who never caused me to worry. You married a good man, you're raising wonderful children, and you've always been there when the family needed you. The house should stay in the family, and I know you'll fill it with the same love and laughter that your mother and I shared there." Jessica smiled through her tears. This was what everyone expected, the favorite daughter inheriting the family home, the stable one being rewarded for her conventional choices. "However," Mr. Patterson continued, and something in his tone made both of us sit up straighter, "the house comes with a condition. Jessica, you must share with your sister the truth about why I seem to favor you, and why I was often harder on Sarah. This truth is contained in the safety deposit box that Sarah now has the key to." Jessica looked confused. "What truth?" Mr. Patterson held up his hand. "Let me continue with the will, and then we'll discuss your father's instructions." He turned the page. "To my daughter Sarah, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all financial accounts, investments, and my life insurance policy, totaling approximately $340,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. Jessica made a small gasping sound. "Dad also left this explanation," Mr. Patterson continued. "Sarah, you chose the harder path, the path of service to others. You've sacrificed financial gain to help troubled young people, just like your mother sacrificed her nursing career to raise you girls. You've never asked me for financial help, even when I knew you were struggling with student loans and living expenses. This inheritance is not a reward for being my favorite. It's recognition that you've already proven you don't need my approval to make me proud. The room was silent except for the sound of Jessica crying. But these weren't tears of grief. They sounded angry, hurt. I don't understand, she said, her voice shaking. Everyone always said I was his favorite. He was always proud of me, always bragging about my accomplishments. Mr. Patterson set down the will and looked at both of us with compassion. Your father asked me to explain this part personally, because he knew it would be painful. Jessica, he was proud of you, genuinely proud. But he asked me to tell you that his public praise of your achievements was partly to mask his worry about Sarah. What do you mean? I asked, though pieces were starting to fall into place. Your father was terrified that if he showed how proud he was of Sarah's work, how much he admired her courage and independence, it would encourage her to take even more risks. He worried about her safety in Chicago, worried about her working with dangerous kids, worried that she was sacrificing too much of herself for others. So he publicly praised Jessica's safe, conventional choices, while privately agonizing over Sarah's brave but risky ones. Jessica stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You mean he was proud of Sarah all along? Not just proud, Mr. Patterson said gently. According to your father, Sarah reminded him so much of your mother that it sometimes took his breath away. He said, Sarah had your mother's fierce heart and stubborn independence, and that both thrilled and terrified him. I pulled out the letter I'd found in Dad's dresser. Jessica, there's something else. I found this yesterday. I handed her the unsent letter. As Jessica read, her expression changed from confusion to understanding to something that looked like heartbreak. When she finished, she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. All these years I thought I was the favorite. And I probably made you feel terrible about it. It's not your fault, I said, though part of me was still processing the magnitude of this revelation. You couldn't have known. But I could have been more sensitive. I could have tried to include you more, especially after you moved to Chicago. Instead, I just accepted that Dad and I were closer, and I never questioned why. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat gently. There's one more thing. Your father left instructions that you should visit the safety deposit box together. He said there are things there that will help you both understand his choices, and hopefully help you understand each other better. As we left the law office an hour later, my head was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about my family dynamics had been turned upside down. Dad hadn't favored Jessica. He'd been so proud of me that he was afraid his pride would put me in more danger. Jessica hadn't been the golden child. She'd been the safe choice that allowed him to worry less. But the biggest revelation was still waiting for us at the bank. First National Bank was a short walk from the law office, but Jessica and I barely spoke during the 10-minute journey. The weight of what we'd learned was settling over both of us, reshaping years of assumptions and misunderstandings. The safety deposit box area was in the basement, a sterile room with fluorescent lighting and the institutional smell of recycled air. The bank employee, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, led us to box 247 and discreetly stepped away to give us privacy. I inserted the key with trembling hands. Inside the narrow metal box were several items, another manila folder, a small wrapped package, and what looked like a photo album. Jessica and I sat at the small table in the viewing room, and I opened the folder first. Inside were documents that made my breath catch, copies of every check Dad had ever sent me going back to college. But these weren't just the checks I remembered receiving for birthdays and Christmas. There were dozens of others sent to my college for anonymous scholarship donations in amounts that exactly matched what I'd needed to avoid taking out additional student loans. Oh my God, Jessica whispered, looking over my shoulder. Sarah, look at the dates. He was sending money to your school the entire time you were there. I flipped through the canceled checks, my vision blurring with tears. Payments to my college for textbooks, I'd assumed, were covered by grants. Payments to my apartment complex in Chicago for property improvements. that had somehow resulted in my rent being lower than my lease stated. Even payments to the community center where I worked, donations that had funded the scholarship program I thought I'd single-handedly created. He was supporting me this whole time, I said, my voice barely a whisper. All those years I thought he didn't care about my work. He was secretly funding it. Jessica picked up the photo album with shaking hands. Inside were pictures I'd never seen before. Photos of me at work, clearly taken from across the street or through windows. Dad at my college graduation, standing in the back where I hadn't seen him, with an expression of pure pride on his face. A photo of him at one of my charity 5K runs, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses like he was trying not to be recognized. He was there, Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, he was there for everything. Look. She pointed to a photo of Dad standing outside the community center, reading the plaque that mentioned my scholarship program. The expression on his face was one of absolute joy and pride. But it was the last item in the album that broke both of our hearts. It was a letter from Mom to Dad, written just before she died when I was 16. Jessica read it aloud, her voice cracking with emotion. My darling Richard, I know you're scared about raising the girls alone, especially Sarah. She's so much like I was at that age, determined to save the world, no matter the cost to herself. I need you to promise me something. Let her fly. Don't let your fear of losing her keep her from becoming who she's meant to be. She'll choose the hard path, the dangerous path, the path that helps others. And it will terrify you every single day. But that's how you'll know she's truly my daughter. Love her enough to let her go, and trust that we raised her strong enough to take care of herself. I was sobbing now, understanding finally flooding through me like a dam breaking. Dad hadn't been distant or critical. He'd been following Mom's dying wish to let me find my own way, even though it scared him to death. The wrapped package contained one final surprise. A small jewelry box with Mom's wedding ring inside, along with a note. For Sarah, when she finds someone who loves her courage as much as I love her mother's. Jessica and I sat in that sterile bank room and cried together for the first time since we were children. We cried for the misunderstandings, for the years of thinking we understood our family dynamics, for the pain we'd both carried unnecessarily. I'm so sorry, Sarah, Jessica said, pulling me into a hug. All these years, I thought I was the special one, and I probably made you feel terrible. You didn't know, I said, hugging her back. None of us knew. Dad was so busy protecting his secret that he let us all believe something that wasn't true. But why didn't he just tell us? Jessica asked. Why go through all this elaborate secrecy? I thought about Dad's personality, his quiet, reserved nature, his tendency to show love through actions rather than words. Because he was Dad, I said simply. He was never good with emotional conversations. It was easier for him to love us from a distance than to risk saying the wrong thing. As we packed up the contents of the safety deposit box, Jessica said, You know, there's something I need to tell you too. Something I've never admitted, even to myself. I looked at her, seeing my sister clearly for perhaps the first time in years. I was jealous of you, she said quietly. Everyone always talked about how I was the favorite, but I could see how much more interesting you were. You had adventures, you made a difference in people's lives, you were brave enough to move away and build something meaningful. I stayed here partly because it was safe, but partly because I was afraid I couldn't succeed anywhere else. This revelation stunned me. Jessica, you built a beautiful life. You have a loving husband, amazing kids, a career that helps people. A safe career, she corrected. I became a nurse partly because it's what Mom did, partly because I knew Dad would approve. But you became a social worker because it was your calling, regardless of what anyone thought. That takes courage I've never had. We talked for another hour in that bank basement, really talked, probably for the first time since we were teenagers. We talked about our different personalities, our different choices, our different ways of making Dad proud. We talked about Mom's influence on both of us, and how Dad's love had shaped us in ways we'd never understood. When we finally left the bank, we had plans to meet for dinner that weekend. Just the two of us without husbands or kids or the weight of old assumptions. We had years of real sisterhood to catch up on. 3 months later, as I write this story, I'm back in Cleveland. Not permanently, I still love my work in Chicago, but I'm spending more time here, getting to know Jessica's children, helping her sort through more of Dad's belongings, and slowly building the relationship we should have had all along. I also started reading some of Dad's unsent letters at community events, with Jessica's permission, of course. The story of a father who loved his daughter so much he was afraid his pride might put her in danger resonates with a lot of people. It's helped other families start difficult conversations about how they show love and support. The house Jessica inherited has become a gathering place for our extended family in a way it never was when we were growing up. And the money Dad left me? Part of it went to expanding the scholarship program he'd been secretly funding for years. The rest is in a savings account, waiting for the day I'm ready to start my own nonprofit. But the most valuable inheritance wasn't money or property. It was the truth. The understanding that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to, and that sometimes the people who seem to care the least are actually caring so much it scares them. At Dad's funeral, they called Jessica the favorite. Now I know the truth. We were both his favorites, just in different ways. And that truth has given us back not just our father's love, but each other. Sometimes the most important revelations come not when someone is alive to explain them, but when they're gone, and we're forced to piece together the real story from the clues they left behind. Dad's greatest gift to us wasn't the inheritance, or even the explanations. It was forcing us to look deeper, to question our assumptions, and to finally understand that love and fear often wear the same face. In the end, we didn't just inherit Dad's belongings. We inherited his love, his worries, his pride, and his hope that we would finally understand each other. And we did.